Good morning, everybody. I hope you all got to see President Biden's speech last night. Absolutely extraordinary, honest, filled with empathy, and filled with direction for the future. I really appreciate President Biden's leadership because he's giving us clear goals, being honest about the challenges we faced, but he's giving us a sense of direction that we didn't have last year so often, and now we're getting, and that's tremendously helpful. And obviously, the huge news that the president signed the stimulus, the single biggest shot in the arm for the American people since the New Deal. And this is going to change everything. This is going to make recovery possible. This is the bottom line. Stimulus equals recovery. Now it's here. Tremendous, tremendous moment. We also, here in New York City, we're hearing loud and clear the president's vision of how we move forward, how we speed the process of vaccinating our people, reopening our economy, bringing ourselves forward. I agree entirely with the president that we need to move aggressively. Obviously, what we're missing is the supply. We need the vaccine. Supply, supply, supply. I'll keep saying it. But the president put forward an extraordinary goal, and one I agree with. May 1st, to open up vaccination to everyone. I think that's exactly the right thing to do. That's going to help us to have the best approach to vaccination when all adults know that they are eligible. So we're ready to go, but we need the supply. Now, as to what's happened to date, again, progress keeps being made. Not as much as we could make if we had more supply, but still great, great results. Since the beginning of this process, beginning of the vaccination effort, 2,636,645 vaccinations have been given in New York City. We really look forward to that number jumping up a lot more when we get even bigger supply. Now, other news yesterday I'm not so happy about. The state of New York announced an end of the quarantine requirement for travelers as of April 1st. I don't know if that's the state's idea of an April Fool's joke, but it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. It's reckless. It doesn't help us with our recovery. Look, if you say someone is vaccinated, they can fly, they can visit, of course. But if someone's not vaccinated, what's so hard about following the same process that has been followed to date? This is what our healthcare leaders believe makes sense. Go through the normal testing process, and if you need to quarantine, you need to quarantine. That's what keeps us all safe. So I think that decision by the state is reckless. I think it should be reevaluated because we're making progress. Let's not undermine it, especially at a time when we're worried about the variants that are out there. Okay, now I want to turn to a very big, important topic, and I want to talk about what I always talk about, our recovery and a recovery for all of us. A recovery for all of us is not just about economics. It's not just about jobs. It's not just about stimulus. It is about all our communities. It is about creating a better city, not just replacing the status quo of the past. It means a city where everyone is respected and heard. And when it comes to being heard, something remarkable has happened in these last months. And today you're going to hear from the authors of this remarkable effort. Over the last months in this city, nearly 100 meetings and public hearings have been held as part of our process to reform the NYPD, to reform the relationship between police and community. This is one of the most extraordinary efforts to hear all stakeholders and to hear the voices of the public that I've ever seen. You're going to hear from Commissioner Shea, who believed deeply in this process and participated deeply. You're going to hear from three great leaders, three great community leaders who, in their own rights, run very important organizations, but gave of themselves an immense amount of time and energy to go hear the voices of the people and then take their voices, take their ideas and craft them into a sprawling reform package, a transcendent reform package. And this is what we're presenting today, the second part of the reform proposal for the NYPD. More to come in the days ahead, but this is a signature moment, and it really is based on an intensive and devoted effort to hear the voices of the people. Part one of our report came out last week with 36 proposals for police reform. Part two, released today, has 28 more important proposals for making the NYPD more effective, more responsive, more sensitive to communities, for drawing communities and NYPD closer, for changing some things that haven't worked as well, and addressing the inequities of the past and laying a path forward. 5 key themes are at the core of this report. And the community leaders who played such an important role really focused on ensuring these 5 themes pervaded everything we did. Number 1, decriminalizing poverty, ending that painful reality we've known for so long, what has often been called the school to prison pipeline. That reality of folks being born poor, lacking opportunity, finding many, many challenges in life materially, and then on top of it, ending up involved in the criminal justice system, magnifying their challenges, magnifying the inequality and unfairness, and limiting their life's potential. That must be overcome. It's going to be immensely challenging work. It's going to take not just NYPD, but every part of city government. But we commit ourselves further to that work in this report. Number 2, recognition of historical and modern-day racialized policing in New York City. This gets to the heart of acknowledging history and being committed to overcoming what history has left us and recognizing the structural racism that still exists, systematically undoing it. Number 3, transparency and accountability to the people of New York City. We have found time and time again, more transparency leads to more trust. More accountability leads to more trust. More trust leads to an actual ability of the NYPD and communities to work together for the good of all to keep everyone safe. In this report with these proposals, we deepen transparency and accountability. Number 4, community representation and partnership. This is what neighborhood policing is all about, but we have more to do. Making sure that the NYPD reflects the city in every way, hears the city, works in partnership with the people of the city, the organizations that represent our communities in new and stronger ways. This is the essence of policing that is sustainable and works and is believed in by communities. This principle pervades this report. Number 5, a diverse, resilient, and supported NYPD. And this really emphasizes the fact that community buy-in makes all things possible. And people see an NYPD that reflects their community and its composition, that hears their community and makes adjustments and changes based on community concerns, that is resilient in the sense that it grows and moves with the times and new understandings. That becomes NYPD that has the active support of communities. That is how you keep everyone safe. Let me talk about 5 specific proposals that you'll see in this report, which is obviously available publicly today. Number 1, we're deepening our early intervention efforts to identify officers who have particular problems and challenges that must be addressed. This, in some cases, means an officer needs retraining. In other cases, it means an officer who, for a period of time, should not be doing duty on our streets and for whom there needs to be a deeper reevaluation. For some officers, it may mean the recognition that perhaps they do not belong on the police force. This is not the majority of our officers by any stretch of the imagination. The vast majority of our officers do their job conscientiously and well. But as in every field, every profession, there are some people who either struggle or don't belong. Our early intervention efforts will be deepened to identify those who need extra help or need a different approach, and to make sure that their work is not in any way endangering the people of this city. Number 2, we're calling upon the state of New York to help us to address an outstanding problem. Look, again, let's go to the big picture. The big picture is the vast majority of our officers do their job well, and thank God there are very few instances in which an officer is found to have done something profoundly wrong that led to the death or lasting, serious, grievous injury of a New Yorker. But in those very few tragic cases, consequences are crucial. We're calling upon the state of New York to pass a law that allows, in those cases where there has been due process and an officer is found to have inappropriately acted, leading to the death or long, grievous injury of a New Yorker, that in those cases that officer would not have the ability to enjoy a pension. That we want to make sure the state joins us and can only be achieved by state law. The state will join us in this effort and pass a law that would allow for the forfeiting of pensions in those instances. Number 3, the promotion process. The NYPD has been doing really extraordinary work in recent years to change the approach to promotion, to make sure the police leadership looks more and more like the people in New York City, to make sure that talented officers have opportunity, and officers that may have some problems or limitations are identified. But we want to formalize that process further. We want it to be more transparent. We want the public to understand it better. How the good work that officers do is weighed, their service record, their accomplishments, their engagement with the community, and the value they put as leaders on engaging communities and hearing and acting on community feedback, and of course, their full disciplinary record. All of these elements have to be considered. They are considered in a promotion process, but we want to do it more formally, more clearly, and transparently going forward. Number 4, important change that we're proposing today to further ensure that the NYPD looks like New York City, and in fact is made up more and more of residents of New York City. Look, today's NYPD is a very different police force than even 10 or 20 years ago. It is much more representative in its leadership ranks and among rank and file, but we need to go further. So currently, we provide a 5-point preference for New York City residents in the application process to become an NYPD officer. We will now double that to a 10-point preference. And this will greatly advantage New York City residents who want to serve this city on the NYPD. 5th, we're going to be forming a large effort, an intense effort, working with our new schools chancellor, Misha Ross Porter, and our task force on racial inclusion and equity. That's leaders of color in all city government agencies. This extraordinary group of leaders is going to work together on a major initiative to end the school-to-prison pipeline, to systematically review all elements of city policy, and this goes far beyond the NYPD, all elements of city policy that might be contributing to, wrongly contributing, inadvertently contributing to that reality of pipeline, and also all of the available tools we have and that we can call upon the state and federal government to bring to bear to end the reality of that pipeline once and for all. This is very difficult work. If anyone's thinking right now that's work that's going to take a lot of effort and a long time, you are right. But we've got to begin now because it must be undone, it must be changed, and we're committed to doing that. So that is an overview of some of the key principles in today's report and some of the proposals that I think are most important for New Yorkers to hear and I think will make the biggest change in the way we police our city and bring police and community together. I want to turn to the commissioner with this. I appreciate that Commissioner Shea put himself heart and soul into the process of listening to New Yorkers about what they were experiencing with their interactions with the NYPD, what changes they foresaw, what they thought would work, and he heard them. And he also has recognized a history that must be overcome. He gave a very powerful speech 2 weeks ago to the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, talked about the history of the NYPD, not just the noble history, the heroic history, but the troubled history as well, and the structural racism that existed in the past and still must be overcome. It was an honest speech, and it reflected his heart, and people received it as such. He's further issued a letter today as part of this report that I think speaks powerfully to that recognition, and it's historic and important. So I want to thank the commissioner for what he's saying. I want to thank him for what he's doing. I want to thank him for listening to the people of this city. And with that, I'd like to welcome the commissioner to speak about this report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think all of us, all New Yorkers, know the difficult year that we've had. And when you came out of last spring and June, one of the things that resonated to me many times was, what do we do now? And how do we move forward as a city? So I just briefly want to thank everyone, all New Yorkers, first and foremost, that took part in this process. The mayor mentioned we've held close to 100 meetings. We've had periods where we are soliciting information from New Yorkers on where we are, what works, what doesn't work, and most importantly, how do we move forward together as one city? So to all New Yorkers that took part in this process, I say thank you. I also want to thank the members of the NYPD that behind the scenes were a part of this reform initiative and continue to be. And it has been an immense amount of work. And I will not name you and single you out, but you know who you are, and thank you for your efforts here that are continuing. This reform over the last 7+ years has been a steady pace, I would say, but this opportunity that presents itself now, I think, is critical and most important. And this reform package is a piece of it, but rest assured, it doesn't end here. It's going to continue. And lastly, to 3 specific people who I will name: Jennifer Jones-Austin, Wes Moore, and Arva Rice, who probably about 6 months ago, give or take, I reached out to and had a conversation with and asked them to take a chance on the NYPD to come forward and work with us to be co-sponsors on this initiative. And much of what we worked together alongside each other is the fabric of this reform plan that you see now. We heard a lot from New Yorkers across New York City. We heard good, we heard sometimes bad, and most importantly, we asked the questions and we listened about what do you want. So to Jennifer, to Wes, to Arva, thank you for the work. I think I stayed true to my word when I said take a chance and come in on the ground floor and have a chance to affect policy. And that work does not end. It continues, but a sincere thank you. So, Mr. Mayor, back to you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I want to just say to our 3 colleagues, we were talking earlier, some of us, about the immense amount of time and energy. I don't know if the public could possibly imagine what it's like for folks who do so much work already to try and help other people. And that's the 3 people you're going to hear from in a moment, but then found an immense amount of additional time to work on this reform effort and listen patiently and intently to the voices of New Yorkers. It's not easy to balance everything in life, but it was a labor of love, and it's had a huge impact. So I want to turn to each of them, starting with Jennifer Jones-Austin, who we have worked together on so many initiatives, including this very week, earlier this week, on the effort to end solitary confinement in the city through her leadership of the Board of Corrections. Again, I don't know where she finds the time, but I'm very glad she did. This effort, Jennifer, has been extraordinary, and I want to thank you and welcome your comments.
Thank you, Mayor de Blasio. I learned very early on in life that you find time for the things that matter, and this work, this matters most to so many of us. I'm just really proud to be a part. I want to thank you and Commissioner Shea for the opportunity to contribute and to help bring the voice of the community to the table. Working together, Arva and Wes and our organization colleagues, I have to mention their names: Emily Miles, Jason Cohn, and Megan Collins McDonald, Donovan Williams, working with your respective leaders and your teams and with you two. We put together a proposed plan with a set of recommendations that I believe not only chart a path forward, but acknowledge the harms and the hurt that make a new path forward a must and not an option. The recommendations that we've outlined in this report give us a great deal to be hopeful about and much to do. As you, Mayor, and the Commissioner will agree, our work is far from done. With so much still to do, I'm encouraged by the themes of this proposed plan, centering on racialized policing, building trust in community partnerships, reforming discipline, transparency, and accountability, and supporting police officers and the challenges that they experience. We believe that all of these aims are critical to true reform. But as an anti-poverty advocate, I have to admit that I am especially heartened by the focus that's also being placed on the decriminalization of poverty. For so long, and with every good reason, the issue of racialized policing has been the central concern of Black and Brown people, men and women, mothers and fathers, boys and girls, advocates and activists. But as you recognize, Mayor de Blasio, and you too, Commissioner Shea, we can't truly overcome systemic racism in policing without also addressing the experience of being low income and of color in New York City and frankly across this nation. If you're Black or brown and poor, you're at an even greater risk of being drawn into the criminal justice system. Low income neighborhoods are the most heavily policed, Social safety net benefit recipients are monitored, tracked, and prosecuted for fraud. Justice system fees and fines have a greater punitive impact on low-income people. Exclusionary discipline in schools has driven disengagement. And sadly, there's more. The data tells the story. As poverty rates increase in community districts, jail incarceration rates increase. And community districts with high jail incarceration rates also experience high rates of unemployment, psychiatric hospitalizations, and school absentee rates. These data points serve as indicators of the complex relationship between poverty and justice involvement. What is promising is that this proposed plan that you all are putting forward calls for the examination and the ending of policies that over-police lower income and minority communities. And it calls for the prioritizing and invoking principles of budget justice to increase and enhance key services that support low-income individuals, families, and communities to bring an end to the poverty to prison pipeline. These and the many other reforms that have been put forward make me proud to have been on board with creating this plan and now supporting it, and to be on board for the long haul, to see it through to full implementation. I just want to thank you and my co-sponsors and all who played a part in bringing us to this point. And I want you to know that I'm on board through to the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And we've been working together for years, and I know you'll be there the whole way through and in the extraordinary work to come. Thank you. I want to turn to Wes Moore, and I want to say I've gotten to know Wes over recent years through his extraordinary leadership of the Robin Hood Foundation. He has done transformative work there, has recognized that if we're going to address issues of poverty and injustice, we have to do things a very different way, and he's challenged everyone to do those things differently and then put real support behind it. And I know this is something he is passionate about, believing that change can happen and then doing the hard work to make it happen. Wes, we welcome your comments on this report.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much, and thank you for your push and for your leadership on this, and to you and to the police commissioner for the time, for the commitment to the process, and as you said, for doing the hard work of listening to the people of New York, no matter how hard some of these conversations have been, but then taking that and actually writing a plan that is both reflective and also aspirational. Going through this process with my co-sponsors, Jennifer and our team has been an absolute joy. And I would also just want to give a special thank you to all the hundreds of community members who we have spent these months working with. All of you who gave your time to this process, who gave your faith to this process, and frankly, who gave your faith in us, that we would hope to be, represent your voice. You all are why we got involved, and we're grateful. And we know, as the mayor correctly stated, that this is not the end of the process, that there's still a lot of work to be done. But the movement that we have seen is important, and it should be acknowledged. The plan includes an entire section on recognizing and continuing to examine the historical and present day racialized policing practices that have plagued New Yorkers, and especially Black and brown residents of the city, for far too long, and to continue to impact people's experiences and interactions with law enforcement even to this day. The plan acknowledges that while the draconian policy of stop and frisk was ended under the time of the de Blasio administration, but the reality is Black and brown New Yorkers are still living under the blanket of abusive police practices that seem to only single them out simply because the color of their skin. And this matters. It matters both because of the short-term impacts on this basic assault on humanity, but it also matters because there are long-term impacts on economic prospects. New data that Robin Hood recently did in partnership with Brennan Center for Justice finds that a prison sentence, regardless of any form of length, cuts annual earning potential in half, which results in a loss of nearly $500,000 over the course of a career. For people of color, the effects are even greater. For Black and Latinx people who have a prison record and experience that, they will find that it is nearly flat a trajectory in their earnings, in their lifetime earnings, while their white counterparts are able to steadily climb across a lifetime. And so this plan does call for the city to create a dedicated process to acknowledge, to address, and to repair past and present injustices and trauma caused by the practice of racialized policing. Truth is a prerequisite to progress. It calls on the NYPD to participate in a comprehensive independent review to identify and assess persistent structural barriers of racism within the department, and also building upon a federal monitor's reforms for policing training, supervision, and the handling of citizen complaints and discipline for officers who are guilty of misconduct. It stresses that this plan pushes and addresses the issue of removing school safety agents from the authority of the NYPD to the Department of Education, with a goal of making our schools a supportive, safe place for children, rather than creating an environment where children, especially Black and brown children, are trapped into a pipeline that is a genuine poverty to prison and criminal justice pipeline. It requires NYPD supervisors to proactively monitor discretionary officer activity for indications of bias-based policing and take corrective actions and measurements for these offenses. And importantly, what it also does is it understands the interconnectedness of all of these pillars that the mayor laid out. Understanding that accountability does come with an understanding of the impacts of racialized policing. Understanding the impacts of racialized policing does come with an understanding and a focus on the decriminalization of poverty and how that's necessary to have accountability measures. All of these pillars, they lean on each other. And we have a core insistence and a core focus on this idea and this measurement, as Jennifer pointed out, of budget justice that still needs to be addressed. And we look forward to working with the mayor in the short term and the long term to ensure that the upcoming budget includes the necessary financial resources to achieve his vision of completely reimagining policing within the NYPD. So I'm grateful for the chance that as we're going through a process to push for necessary changes in our community, changes that we have seen and known and understood ever since my time as a child, that we now have a process to be able to see that through, and that I was asked to have a seat at the table to help represent community voice on it. So I'm grateful and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here today and then beyond.
Thank you so much, Wes. And Wes, you said many powerful things, but I want to just cling to one that I particularly appreciate. Truth is a prerequisite to progress. This report has a lot of straightforward, clear truth in it, and it aims high. I liked what you said also in the beginning. There's a lot of practical right now elements, and there's aspirational elements that also say, even if it's going to take tremendous effort, we have to make fundamental change. And I really thank you for the way you framed that, and thank you for your extraordinary efforts.
Thank you.
All right, now I want to turn to we've had three great leaders in this effort. I want to turn to the third, and she has a long history in this city of fostering economic justice, economic opportunity. And one of the things you see in this report is it recognizes the interplay of policing with economic and social factors and how all these issues have to be addressed systematically. And her voice comes through loud and clear in those ideas that are put forward in this report. My pleasure to introduce the CEO of the New York City Urban League, Arva Rice.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, Police Commissioner. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you all and to speak with our listeners this morning. On October 13th of last year, I stood with my co-sponsors, Jennifer Jones Austin, CEO and Executive Director of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, and Wes Moore, CEO of Robin Hood, to accept an invitation to join the Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative. At that time, I shared my enthusiasm as well as my concern. I was heartened that the executive order called on every locality to engage in an effort to hear from their communities and solicit input and work towards solutions. But like many of you, I was also skeptical. New York is an old city, and so is our police department. NYPD had experienced its share of task forces, advisory committees, and focus groups. Yet a few zip codes, as Wes just mentioned, or precincts still experience the highest number of arrest, mistreatment, and tragically even death. And honestly, Over the course of these past few months, there have been times when we met with community members who cursed and cried in frustration. We spoke with police officers in confidence who, while proud to wear their badge, were struggling with how their department would respond to a racial awakening. So at this time that we draw near to the end of this official process, we ask all of you to respond, to which all of you will respond in the public comments period. I'm struck by how much work is still left to be done. Today, we have some recommendations that can be revised and retooled to bring change to police-community relations. Today's report centers on, as you heard from the mayor, 5 key themes: the decriminalization of poverty, the recognition and continual examination of historical and modern-day racialized policing, transparency and accountability to the people of New York City, community representation and partnership, and creating a diverse, resilient, and supported NYPD. My area of concern walking into this work was accountability, and this focus remains the same for me. The co-chairs believe that for the NYPD to be a legitimate and credible public safety institution that is worthy of the trust of all of the city's communities, it must be transparent and hold its members accountable. For too long, we have heard that the NYPD has a few bad apples. Well, it's time that we prune the orchard. This version of the report provides 3 specific ways to help identify bad apples early and have them face real consequences. There, as the mayor already mentioned, there's the expansion of the early intervention program to identify and assess at-risk officers. Secondly, there's support for a state law to ensure that pension forfeiture or reduction is possible in the most egregious cases of police misconduct. And lastly, there is an effort to create a citywide policy to strengthen transparency and accountability in the use of biometric technology or face recognition and fingerprinting. There is more to be done, and I look forward to continuing to converse, battle, teach, and learn from the mayor, the commissioner, my co-chairs, city council, and most importantly, advocates and the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arva. And Arva, I really appreciate, and I could tell in our discussions that you really listened with empathy to those voices, including, as you said, in some really painful conversations. But hearing people's pain and turning it into action and turning it into progress is noble work. So thank you so much for your contribution today and everything that will happen in the weeks and months ahead. Everyone, it's worth looking at this report. It is available now online, nyc.gov/police reform. A lot of work, again, a lot of work went into it. It speaks volumes. So I urge everyone to look at it. If you have comments, again, there's a public comment period open, and we are ready to proceed to put these ideas, these proposals into action. So I want to be very clear. The things in this report that can be acted on immediately will be acted on by the City of New York and the NYPD. The elements that require state legislation will be working to get done in this legislative session over these next very few months. But this is a sea change moment, and we need everyone involved in making it come to life. Okay, I'm just going to go over our daily indicators. As we do in all of our gatherings each morning. Number 1, daily number of people admitted to New York City hospitals for suspected COVID-19. Today's report, 208 patients. We have a low confirmed positivity rate today. That's good, but again, there are sometimes daily fluctuations in the data, 37.73%. Hospitalization rate, 3.76 per 100,000. Number 2, new reported cases on a 7-day average. Today's report, 3,039 cases. Number 3, percentage of people testing positive citywide for COVID-19. Today's report on a 7-day rolling average, 6.31%. Just going to say a few words in Spanish on the topic of the police reforms. Fortalecer la relación entre la comunidad y la policía es clave para recuperar una ciudad para todos. Las reformas que presentamos hoy van a transformar el Departamento de Policía de Nueva York para que haya transparencia y contabilidad para todos. Estos cambios harán que todos sean tratados con el respeto y la justicia que merecen. With that, we turn to our colleagues in the media, and please let me know the name and outlet of each journalist.
We'll now begin our Q&A. As a reminder, we're joined today by Commissioner Shea, by Jennifer Jones-Austin, Arvo Rice, Wes Moore, Dr. Choksi, and by Senior Advisor Dr. Jay Varma. The first question today goes to Juliet Papa from 1010 Wins.
Oh, hi, good morning, all. My first question goes to Commissioner Shea. Commissioner, you've participated in the town halls for many months and with residents in different neighborhoods for sit-downs. What was your main takeaway from those meetings?
Thanks, Juliet. People want to be heard. People had a lot of frustration. This is the main, I could go on. I heard, as I said in my opening statement, we heard good, bad, and everything in between. We heard from people that, are concerned and want more police, but they absolutely want to be policed fairly, and they want to be respected. If the one statement I would categorize everything as, they wanted to be heard and they had things to say, and we listened. We went out to them. We had people joining via Facebook, and then we had public comment periods that are going to continue with this second report to hear from the public again. So accountability, Juliet, was when I think that Arva nailed it there. They know that police have a tough job, but when police make mistakes, there's absolutely a feeling, particularly in some neighborhoods, that police won't be held accountable. And, I think that's a larger debate. At times I would disagree with it, but you cannot ignore the emotions that are out there. And you also can't ignore that if that many people are saying it, you better look in the mirror and say, what can we do better? And I think that, a lot of elements of this reform plan are reflected in that. We're proud of what we do. We're proud that we've reformed continuously and look across the country to be the best police department in the world, and I think we are. But that doesn't mean we're done, and that doesn't mean that we're perfect, and that doesn't mean we haven't made mistakes either. So, they wanted to be heard, and the accountability and trust were really key themes that we heard over and over and over again.
Thank you. Go ahead, Juliet.
Okay, and I guess to follow up on this report, we just got it, so I haven't had a chance to look at it thoroughly, but I'd like to know, what role does personal accountability and responsibility play in this as far as New Yorkers are concerned, as far as, respecting laws and civility? How is that addressed in this report?
Oh, I think, Juliet, it pervades this report in every sense because, look, everybody has a responsibility to each other. If there's one thing we've learned during this COVID crisis is we're all in this together. So, of course, everyone has to respect the law and everyone has to work as a member of a community. But I think what the report says is folks also want to be treated equally. They want to be treated with respect. And they want to know that if someone in government does something wrong, if a law enforcement officer does something wrong, that they're going to be held accountable just like a member of the public would be. And they want to know if they're held accountable, will they be treated the same way for their actions as a civilian, depending on the color of their skin? Will they see the same result as someone of a different color or someone from a different neighborhood? This is really about respect and fairness. I think that is strong and clear throughout this report. Go ahead.
The next is Andrew Siff from WNBC.
Mr. Mayor, good morning, and good morning to everyone on the call. Mayor, within the last few minutes, several members of the New York congressional delegation, including Congressman Nadler, have called on the governor to resign. You have not used that word this week. Are you prepared to do so this morning? And if so, doesn't that deprive the governor of due process under the law?
No, Andrew. The governor has been depriving the people of the truth. The governor and his team have been trying to cover up the truth. I mean, we've gotten report after report of purposeful efforts to cover up the facts that the public deserves. We saw it with the nursing homes. We saw it with the Tappan Zee Bridge. We're now seeing it with horrendous efforts by staffers to silence women who are trying to speak their truth. And do you think for a moment they were just making that up? I suspect they got an instruction to do so. So, look, unfortunately, what we're seeing here is a pattern of cover-up and a pattern of lies. It is unacceptable. The governor must resign. He can no longer do the job. Go ahead, Andrew.
Mayor, on the subject of vaccines, based on the president's instruction from last night that all American adults be eligible by May 1st, which seems to move the timeline up. You'll recall I asked about this earlier in the week. How do you make that happen in terms of supply versus eligibility, and could it even happen before May 1st?
Look, when you asked, I think it was you, Andrew, asked the question, what our healthcare team and I responded was we thought that open eligibility would be May or June. So it's really, thankfully, not that different. I think May 1st is a great time to open it up. I think the president's right. It will make things on one level simpler because everyone will know they're eligible. And of course, the state was holding us back from being able to vaccinate anyone at any site. That's been overcome now, thank God, but another example of why we need local control. But the bottom line here is if we have the supply, we keep moving forward. And if on May 1st we're able to vaccinate everyone, we'll make it work. We're ready to do that right now, but we need the supply. We cannot reach our potential if we don't get a hell of a lot more supply. Again, every week we're short about 150,000 to 200,000 doses. We need that addressed. We need the state to give us our fair share. We need the federal government and the manufacturers to speed the distribution. And then we can absolutely get the job done.
The next is James Ford from Pix 11.
Hey, good morning. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, James. How are you?
Not bad. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And hello to everyone on the call. You had called the governor's suspension of the quarantine order a possible April Fool's joke, if I got that right, that could be harmful to New York City residents and needs to be reconsidered. Will you just elaborate on why it could be harmful to the residents of the city and how you want it to be reconsidered? Or do you actually want it to be fully reversed, even though it seems like a done deal?
I don't think anything in Albany is a done deal right now. I think a lot of things are changing rapidly in Albany, and anything could be reversed that was done wrong. I'm going to turn to Dr. Varma and Dr. Choksi. I mean, we were all surprised, in fact, shocked when we heard this. It makes no sense to relax such a fundamental standard when we're still fighting this war and we got the variants on top of that. So let me have the doctors do the talking. Dr. Varma.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. We feel really strongly that, we need every weapon on our side to fight back against the coronavirus. As we keep reporting, the virus is using evolution on its side to develop new variants, new ways to be more infectious. So we need all of the tools that we have available to us. And one of the tools that we know works is testing and tracing. And the reason these quarantine rules are beneficial to us is that they serve as a really critical reminder to people who are traveling to other places around the country, around the world, that they need to be tested before they get on a plane. They need to get tested after they get off that plane and are at home. And they need to stay isolated until they're confirmed that they haven't acquired COVID during that time. Throughout this epidemic, we've seen that travel-associated cases have represented anywhere from 5 to 10% of all of the cases that we see here in New York City. That may not seem like a lot, but as we know with this disease, even one case can lead to an outbreak and spread. So we need really everything on our side at this point as we continue in this sort of tense fight that we have right now with the virus.
Thank you. Dr. Choksi.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I will just add briefly that the reason that it's particularly important, to maintain travel quarantine, we just have to look around the world and around the country to see that cases, do continue to be a problem in other jurisdictions as well. There are major COVID-19 outbreaks occurring in parts of Europe, in parts of South America, and there are, greater proportions of certain variants seen in other parts of the United States as well as around the world as well. So this has been a critical tool in our fight, as Dr. Varma has mentioned. And now is just the time for us to be recommitting and redoubling our efforts when the idea that we could turn the corner on the pandemic is finally in our sight.
Amen. Go ahead, James.
Thanks very much. The state assembly speaker has now begun this process that could lead to Governor Cuomo's impeachment. Look, you've made it clear how you feel about the need for the governor to resign. How do you feel about possible impeachment, please?
James, look, the governor should do the right thing and recognize that he just can't do the job any longer. He's lost the faith of his fellow leaders around the state, and I think he's increasingly losing the faith of the people. And unfortunately, this is because of his own actions and the actions that he directed his team to do. But if he tries to persist in the role, then the impeachment process, I believe, will resolve it that way. In the meantime, the work of government's going to keep going forward. You know, we're here every single day doing our work. The state legislature is doing its work very effectively on a host of issues. We're going to keep moving forward no matter what. But I think he should do something that's decent after these many, many indecent revelations and simply resign.
The next is Emily from New York One.
Good morning, Mayor de Blasio and Commissioner Shea. A question on the residency requirements or lack thereof for the NYPD. What precludes the city from requiring that all new hires be New York City residents now?
So, Emily, that is a matter of state law. In addition to policy matters, remember, something like that has to be dealt with on a bigger level. We have to be clear about the fact that over the years, there's been more and more recognition that for working people, including so many of our public servants, it is very hard to afford this city. And that's a fundamental challenge. But a way that we can address our desire to have more and more New York City residents on the police force, a way we can do it productively and immediately, is to double the points given for preference for New York City residents. That's something that's going to be a big difference maker, and that'll bring more and more city residents onto the force. Go ahead, Emily.
In addition to the very clear need for more supply when it comes to the COVID vaccine, what else does the city need to carry out President Biden's edict, for lack of a better word, that all adults have access beginning in May?
That's really it, is the supply, Emily. We've got the locations. In fact, we're adding more locations. We've got the vaccinators. We're building up our Vaccine for All Corps. We're ready right now to be doing over 500,000 vaccines a week. I think that number is going to climb higher. I think when we get the full supply we deserve, we're going to go well beyond 500,000 vaccinations a week. Just one thing missing: supply, supply, supply. We get the supply. We'll be able to handle it, even with every adult being eligible.
The next is Alan Villafana from Telemundo.
Good morning, Mr. de Blasio. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much. Well, last night, President Biden said that every American must help to put an end to this pandemic. And last week, Dr. Fauci said that the new coronavirus reached a plateau in the Washington Heights area. Do you have a message for the residents in this area, especially Latinos?
My message is that we are all in this together. We do all need to participate in defeating the virus. The president spoke passionately and earnestly. Every single one of us has to keep doing the smart things, not one but two masks whenever possible, and the social distancing, and realizing not to let our guard down. But we also, it's our obligation as the city to ensure that vaccination and testing is provided with special emphasis in the communities hardest hit by COVID, like Washington Heights. And so we will be expanding vaccination efforts in Washington Heights as part of what we're going to do in the weeks ahead as we get more supply of the vaccine. Dr. Choksi, if you want to add, feel free.
Thank you, sir. I'll just add briefly, we know that Latino New Yorkers in many ways have borne so much suffering and the brunt of this pandemic over the last few months. And so the message that I would add to the mayors is that this is such an important time for us to ensure that we take all of the public health precautions that we know work. Masking, distancing, hand washing, staying home when you're ill, getting tested, and getting vaccinated when it's your turn. This is our chance, particularly for those communities, Washington Heights, but more broadly, across all of New York City, for us to take matters into our own hands so that we can finally recover and get back to a semblance of a normal life.
Amen. Go ahead.
Do you have a plan for when and where there will be new vaccination centers when more vaccines have reached the city?
Yes.
Is there a plan already?
Well, the way we are doing it is continuing to add sites as we're getting more and more vaccine. We're looking for any place where there may be a greater need in terms of the geography. So Washington Heights and Inwood, for example, I'll let Dr. Choksi speak to this, but we literally had a conference call the other day, and one of the places we were talking about is Washington Heights and Inwood as an area where we need additional locations. But the good news is we found we can put a location together very quickly now. The Department of Health and Hospitals have gotten very expert at doing this. We have the staffing. We know how to do it. So when we see an area that needs more intensive vaccination effort, we will add additional locations as we get supply. Dr. Choksi, you want to speak to specifically Washington Heights and Inwood?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Yes, Washington Heights and Inwood is an area that we're very actively looking at with respect to, city-run sites that will supplement some of the infrastructure that's already there, particularly pharmacies and community clinics that are already vaccinating in that area. So stay tuned for more about, when and exactly where those sites will be. But it will be part of a broader strategy. Just in the last week, we've also opened up sites in Co-op City, in the Bronx, as well as in Bedford-Stuyvesant to serve the local populations there as well. We're going to continue doing more of this with respect to city sites, but also partnering with those community health centers, independent pharmacies, and the other places that we know people already trust in their neighborhoods.
Thank you.
The next is Michael Garland from the Daily News.
Hey there, Mr. Mayor. Good morning.
Good morning, Michael. How you been?
I'm doing all right. I wanted to ask you about questions about the police reform package you're talking about today. I was wondering if you could drill down a bit into what the report says about decriminalizing poverty. This is something we've known about for a long time, that in poor neighborhoods you have higher incarceration rates. So how do you change that? What policies? It mentions policies that you're going to look at to possibly change. Could you talk about some of the policies perhaps the city's already identified that you're looking at changing at this point?
Yeah, I'll start. I'd like to bring Jennifer Jones Austin and Arva Rice into this because they have committed so much of their life and work to this fundamental question. But Michael, what I'd say is this. Some of what we've been doing over these last 7 years is a foundation. If you get kids better education from their earliest years, like pre-K and 3K, that's part of breaking this cycle. If you get families affordable housing, that's part of breaking this cycle. If you create opportunities for higher wages and better benefits, like guaranteed health care like we have in this city now, that's part of breaking this cycle. In my view, if you're going to break the school to prison pipeline or the criminalization of poverty, you have to begin by just concentrating everything you've got at ending poverty to begin with. I think another piece of it is the path we've been on with constantly reducing arrest, reducing summonses, reducing incarceration, and obviously even before that, reducing stop and frisk. So the direction has to be just deepened all the time. And I think the next steps, a lot of it revolves around our schools. Our schools chancellor, Misha Ross Porter, is passionate on this topic about the role that education can play in breaking the cycle of poverty. Our task force on racial inclusion and equity is ready to look at every agency's practices to see how we can both address poverty and also be more responsive if anyone is involved in the criminal justice system. And that's one of the things, and I'll turn to Jennifer and Arva because this is one of the key points. God forbid someone does have involvement with the criminal justice system. What happens next is often the game changer. We made a decision years ago that folks who are in our city jails should not just at the end of their time in jail, shouldn't just be sent out with no support. They should get, while in jail, training and education. We greatly expanded it compared to what the previous administration did. We added counseling and support for future planning for folks, what they're going to do after incarceration. And we added a transitional job element so that anyone who came out of incarceration had a job and was able to therefore advance themselves looking for their next permanent job. These are kinds of things that help to break that cycle. But let me let the experts speak. Jennifer and Arva. Jennifer first.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate this question because it centers on the crux of the matter. We have in our society at large, I'm not just speaking about New York City, but across the nation, so many individuals who have been involved one way or another with the system. We have young persons who grew up in poverty, became homeless, became known to the foster care system, and then find themselves incarcerated. We have people who have mental health challenges that become involved with the justice system. And very often, it's because the systems that are there to support them have not really been set up and structured and supported in a way that can really help meet their needs. I lead an organization, FPWA, that works with better than 200 nonprofit human service and faith-based organizations across the city of New York. And just a few years ago, I sat with leaders of these organizations and I asked them, how many of you work with, work to address justice involvement and justice issues? And very few leaders raised their hands. But then when I presented them with the data that shows how great is the correlation between poverty and race and justice involvement in the communities in which they work, they began to think about it and appreciated that many of the individuals and the families with whom they work are justice involved, either directly as persons who've gone through the justice system or as parents of persons who've been justice involved, partners of persons who are justice involved, children of people who've been justice involved. And the harms that attend and keep people from getting ahead, they persist. When a child is a child of an incarcerated parent, that child experiences trauma on an everyday basis that across our society goes unaddressed. And so what we're seeking to do is to break that cycle by centering on what more can be done by the community-based organizations, faith-based institutions that are working with these individuals and their families. What more can be done to make sure that the resources are there to prevent this from happening generation after generation after generation? And then additionally, centering on actual policing practices that, perhaps unintentionally really disadvantage and put poor people in the eye of the police as persons that, have to be policed for, disproportionately and for unnecessary reasons. We're going to look at and then bring an end to the disparities that persist in everything from how communities are policed to what happens with summonses, warnings, arrest rates for similar or the same offenses, or not offenses but what appear to be. So it has to be comprehensive. We've got to engage agency by agency and realize it's not honestly just a policing issue. To end this practice, we have to look as a city at all of the systems and how they bring about or perpetuate this cycle of criminalizing poverty.
Thank you. Arva, would you like to add?
Yes, Jennifer, my dear friend and colleague, has spoken to this issue wonderfully and well, as she always does. So I'm just going to add one brief statistic to the comments that she's made, and that is that in the New York Urban League State of Black New York report, which we recently released, one of the statistics that really sobered me was the fact that African Americans and Latinos make up 17% of the population of New York State, where we make up 92% of the population of our prison system. And so as long as we have those numbers, those stats that are in place, all the things that Jennifer just spoke about in terms of criminalizing our young people, we're not sitting in the basements of suburban houses doing whatever it is that we do. We're standing out on street corners. And as a result, we are constantly interacting with the police, and it leads to negative results. And so this work is so important in order that we stop criminalizing poverty and that we can change those statistics.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Michael.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for two more for today. The next is Caroline from Gothamist.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. So first of all, I have a question related to police accountability. The NYPD disciplinary database that was released a few days ago has some serious gaps in it. It focuses mainly on cases in which an officer was found or pled guilty to department charges and excludes pending cases and charges brought before 2014, cases in which an officer wasn't disciplined. So I'm wondering, is the city going to fill in these gaps, and why is this information being left out?
Caroline, absolutely more is coming. It's a big release. There are legalities, that have to be followed in terms of, for example, redacting names of complainants. But the release is going to continue over the coming days. We want to keep going back farther in time. We're going to be releasing information about substantiated cases involving all active duty officers going back to the beginning of their service. So this is just the beginning of what will be a larger release. Go ahead.
Thank you. I also was interested in the fact that, talking about these recommendations and the report that's coming out, you were saying that there's a focus on acknowledging mistakes of the past. I'm wondering if you're willing to right now acknowledge some of the mistakes that people have called attention to in policing protests for racial justice last spring and summer. There was an investigation into human rights violations in one of the protests. People have called out kettling and other tactics, the use of the SRG. We're about to go into another warm season. We're going to see a resurgence of protests. So I'm wondering if you can acknowledge the mistakes of the past and talk about how protest policing will be different this summer.
Oh, absolutely, Caroline. It's going to be very different. I spoke very personally about the mistakes made, and I took responsibility for my role as leader needing to do better. I think the Department of Investigation report was very fair and identified a series of areas where I have to do better, the department has to do better, and we are doing that right now. We've been implementing those recommendations aggressively. We agree with them. Kettling, for example, is something that never should have happened, never should happen again, period. And we've been very clear over the last few months that that is not an acceptable approach. It will not happen in the future. So I think we learned some very powerful and painful lessons from last year, and I think the work will be very different. Policing will be very different. You're seeing it already in demonstrations around the city. We have a real focus on our community affairs officers being the focal point of how NYPD handles protests. Much more limited role, if any role, for SRG. And I think the work of reform that has been going on since last summer, at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, is being felt. And people see a response to the many, many strong, peaceful protests out there calling for change. They see an honest response, and today's report is that exactly that, is part of that honest response. And I think people recognize when their government is listening and acting. And it does change, the way folks approach things if they feel they're being heard. Go ahead.
Last question for today goes to Henry from Bloomberg.
Mr. Mayor, how are you doing? It's Friday. Morning.
It's Friday morning. Happy Friday, Henry. It's been a very long week, but here in New York City, we keep moving forward. My friend, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's weekend, watch a little baseball. You can't get better than that.
Amen.
But let me ask you a couple of difficult questions, if you will. It's not going to come as any surprise to you, but we have a story out about the inequities in delivering vaccine. If you're on the Upper East Side, you got a great chance. If you're in Harlem, not so much. This you know. But in our reporting, we found many people in communities of color or heavily immigrant communities where residents or council members or assembly members, people who would have deep ties in the community, say the city is invisible despite your efforts. They don't see anything in multi-languages. They're not seeing leafleting. They're not seeing these canvassers that you're talking about. And they all point to this invisibility as part of the problem in getting more participation in these neighborhoods. What do you say to them?
I always listen, Henry. I'll say something. I'll turn to Dr. Choksi as well. I always listen to critiques, and if people say we're not seeing enough outreach, then we have to do more outreach. I'm not even going to contest. I'm not going to tell someone that they saw, they saw something they didn't see, right? But I would say to you, the numbers are speaking for themselves. Over 2.6 million vaccinations as of today. The fact is we do see steady progress in reducing inequity. We are seeing that all over the city. The places where we are setting up additional sites, focusing on communities of color and immigrant communities, those appointments are being filled nonstop. There's no lack of people who want the appointments. They're filling up, and it's creating more equity. Certainly, the door-to-door efforts have helped immensely. Signing up people, particularly seniors, right there at their door. I've been to the site, so I've seen too with my own eyes. I saw what I saw in Red Hook, at Red Hook houses. I saw what I saw at Nostrand houses in southern Brooklyn. I saw what I saw at Co-op City. It's obviously happening. But if we need to do more outreach, we simply will, in as many languages as it takes. Go ahead, Dr. Choksi.
Thank you, sir. And I'll start just with a brief recap of the outreach efforts that we have done. Acknowledging that much work remains, and we remain so committed to our equity goals in the vaccination campaign. But on any given day, we have about 300 canvassers out doing door knocking and getting the word out about vaccination. We've had over 1,250 events since the beginning of our Vaccine for All campaign, town halls, small gatherings with neighborhood organizations and with elected officials as well. We've now knocked on thousands of doors thus far. We've passed out hundreds of thousands of leaflets, really targeting both our task force neighborhoods as well as seniors. And we've made millions of phone calls, to people also targeting those same demographics. Particularly with seniors, as the mayor has mentioned, we've really focused on our NYCHA houses, as well as the naturally occurring retirement communities in partnership with the Department for the Aging. So these are some of the efforts that are underway. We aim for this to continue to grow, particularly as supply increases, because we want to reach into every corner, every neighborhood, because we believe so urgently that getting people vaccinated will save lives.
Amen. Go ahead, Henry.
I don't want to dwell on this too much, but the numbers do speak for themselves. You've got a 41% rate of participation on the Upper East Side. It's about 11% in Central Harlem. So I don't doubt the sincerity and the vigor with which you are approaching this thing, but as of March 9th, those are the numbers. And it would appear from those numbers that even more has to be done, as you say. But let me go on to another question about the issue of the day.
Henry, let me hold you up a second.
Go
Because
ahead.
I know your comment was sincere, and I'm going to certainly recognize your next question. But I just have to say, really respecting, you are very thorough and concerned, but I'm going to say, please be objective. There is a intensive difference in many communities on, at this point, still trust levels and hesitancy levels. I think we've made real progress, but no one's saying that gap has been closed. So it is not just about where the sites are. The sites that the city has set up are overwhelmingly in communities of color in those 33 communities where the need and the danger is greatest. So the physical reality is the sites are there. The people hired to do the vaccinating come from the communities. That's crucial. The outreach efforts are multiple language. There's door to door. All of that needs more. But let's also be clear that we see real differences between communities demographically, and I'd say possibly the single biggest indicator has been income of who's ready, willing, and able to take the vaccine versus who still is hesitating. That's been true up till recently. I think it's starting to change, but you look at those composite figures, you can't leave that piece out of the equation. All right, with that said, go on to your second question.
Well, I need to follow up what you just said because I agree completely with it. The data shows it. We've poured over the data. If you have a car, if you've got more income, more mobility, all of those things are true. Yet, I don't think it's fair to these people, these immigrants and these poor people or minority people to say it's all about distrust and confusion or
Henry, move to your next question because I did not say confusion. It's people's choices. It's choices, brother. People are making choices and respect the fact that some people are ready and some are not. And our job is to educate and make the vaccine available, and that's what we're doing. But look, what we 100% agree on is a hell of a lot more to do. And the thing that will help us the most is supply, honestly. So we can create a lot more momentum.
I need to push back in this respect, which is that a lot of these people in the community, when they hear you talk this way, they think that what you're blaming them for not participating, and they're saying, no, there are institutional or structural problems with the delivery of this vaccine and the outreach that's not reaching these people, that it's not just hesitation.
Okay. Henry, in the interest of time, I know you have another question. I have immense respect for the communities we're serving. And this is why we are doing a huge outreach effort in multiple languages, why we're putting the vaccination centers where we are. And people are making their own choices. And we have to keep doing better, and we will. Absolute and total respect. And no, I'm not in the least suggesting there's something wrong with someone who is hesitant. We're going to overcome it, but we need the supply to do it. Go ahead, Henry, ask your second.
The second question is really, it's about these plans for the police and the findings of this report. And really, one of the things that got you elected in the first place and that set you apart from the other candidates in 2013 is that you recognized these problems in the police department in 2013. And now it's 2021. And believe me, I realize the difficulty and the complexity of dealing with these problems. But it's now 2021. And what in this report really is new or couldn't have been written in 2013, or particularly after Mr. Garner died in 2014?
Look, the bottom line is there are a host of changes that come from everything that we all have learned as a city over these last 7 years. If you said, go back over decades and say there's unfairness and disparity, absolutely right. That's what I talked about when I talked about A Tale of Two Cities. But what we've learned over time is the depth of it. What we've learned over time is the ways that we have to address it, some of which we didn't understand as well. I certainly didn't understand as well. And it's important that by bringing in the voices of community, by bringing in the voices of folks who have devoted their lives to fighting poverty and injustice, more and more solutions have become clear. And I would say, both from what I've tried to do with our administration here at City Hall, also what Commissioner Shea and his predecessors have tried to do, there was a through line here from ending stop and frisk, instituting neighborhood policing, retraining the entire police force in de-escalation, then implicit bias training, body cameras on all our officers, reducing arrests, reducing summons, reducing incarceration. There's been a very clear through line. But we also learned how much more we had to do. So I think these new plans are going to create a lot more transparency. They're going to ensure that if, God forbid, there is something that goes wrong, the consequences are clearer. They're going to ensure that both if an officer has a problem, it's addressed, but also officers who do engage communities energetically and effectively are seen and rewarded in terms of promotion. The fact that we're going to have another tool now to increase the number of New York City residents in the police force, which is good for all of us. The fact that we're going at the issue of poverty and decriminalization of poverty head on. This has been something we've learned year by year, that we have to go deeper and deeper to the root causes, and we have to be blunt and honest about the history of structural racism, and by putting it out there, start to change it. So there's a lot of powerful material in this report, and I'll end on that, everyone. Please take a look at this. It's an extraordinary work. Go to nyc.gov/police reform and recognize this. It's a transformative moment. We don't get these every day in history. It's a time where people are asking the right questions and are open to entirely different solutions. We need to fully engage this moment. We can do extraordinary things. We are the generation that gets to make these changes and these reforms, and this report shows so much that will really, really help to improve the relationship between police and community, help to create justice, help to make us all safer. And that's the work we'll be doing in the days and weeks and months ahead. That's what a recovery for all of us looks like. Thank you, everyone.